Oh, hey. You caught me. I'm just looking at my lack of personal hygiene due to this quarantine. I'll tell you. I'll tell you something. I've been better. I've been better. Uh, I had to resort to a hairband to keep my growing hair out of my eyes, and just so I stop fiddling with it. I have this annoying, destructive habit of playing with my hair. And as my hair gets longer, it just gets worse. And so by putting a headband on, it kind of mitigate that a little bit. And it looks pretty cool. I think I'm pulling it off pretty decently, so I'm going to stick with it. I've also I've just decided, okay, if I can get a haircut, I'm just not going to trim any hair on my body. So I'm leaving my facial hairs kind of growing out. But other than that, I'm holding it together. Totally. So what I wanted to do this video on is how we think about whether something is right or wrong. And I'm going to present the two main ways that people typically feel like something is right or feel like it's wrong. And there's sort of like two schools of thought on this. And I'm not going to present my opinion on it. I'm just going to present the two different schools. And I want you to think about which one you jive with. What do you feel like you are? Okay, so that's kind of the goal of this. So the two schools of morality, quote unquote, or oftentimes this is called like ethics, the philosophy of ethics. You have, on one hand, you have something called deontology. And on the other hand, you have something called utilitarianism, or sometimes called consequentialism. Deontology is the ethics that says actions are right or wrong in and of themselves, regardless of the consequences of those actions. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, is the ethics that says something is right or wrong, not inherently because of the action, but it is the rightness or wrongness of that action is based off of its consequences, the results of what happens because of that action. One is sort of the ends justify the means, that's consequentialism, versus the ends do not justify the means need to be justified in and of themselves, that's deontology. And by the way, this sort of debate between utilitarianism and deontology is an eternal debate. It's been going on for a long time. People pop up throughout history arguing for one side, arguing for the other, and you've got this sort of historical battle going on between the two sides. And it hasn't really ever been resolved. I have my own opinion of where I fall on these two things, but I don't want to taint your opinion by giving you mine. So I'm going to just present them objectively, and then maybe I'll make another video that I think dives maybe into the thing that feels most convincing to me and play that one out. But for now, I'm just going to give you them. Before I even go into a little bit of examples about these two things, I just want you to think immediately when you think about your own ethics, your own values, your own morality, what do you typically think? Do you think that an action can be right or wrong in and of itself, regardless of its consequences? Or are you someone who thinks, you know what? You can't really say an action is right or wrong unless you know what it leads to, right? Or what its consequences are, right? So I want you to kind of immediately think about that just right now, before even going on. Like, where do you fall right now? The best example of a moral code is any religion. So typically religions are deontological. Their ethics are based off of a moral code that says certain actions are right or wrong in and of themselves, regardless of the outcome, right? They have this sort of ingrained moral code. And in the case of most religions, that moral code comes from a god, right? From some sort of supernatural being that's outside of the human race, and it's given to humans from some, supernatural being. Religion is like the OG of philosophy and ethics. It was the beginning, right? It was sort of humans' first attempt at sort of coming up with some sort of morality. And so the deontological code of ethics and philosophy is sort of the ancient version, and it still persists to this day. I'm not saying anything in particular about it, but deontology was first, and then a lot of philosophers and thinkers came about over the years and centuries after, throughout the religious history, and started to critique religion a little bit and sort of question some of the assumptions that's built into religion. And one of those assumptions was this idea of a moral code. And so over the years, this idea of utilitarianism and consequentialism developed as sort of a counter to morality and ethics that the religious deontological argument had. And now in modern day, they're the two sort of main things. You have some people that are deontologists, some people that are consequentialists, and they're sort of in contention with each other. And not always contention, but they definitely are opposed, right? They're almost mutually exclusive to an extent, just by definition. A lot of scientists have come around have been utilitarian. So I've mentioned Sam Harris before. He's a good example of a utilitarian philosopher and scientist. But yeah, so oftentimes it's sort of like science is more of a utilitarian, consequentialist viewpoint, and religion is more of the deontological one. That's not always true. It's definitely possible to have people cross that divide. But that's generally the sort of the gist. So wherever you fall right now, that's fine. Let me give you some concrete examples that might help you place yourself a little better and maybe even change where you are. And so oftentimes the kinds of examples and scenarios we use to help us think about whether or not we're more deontologists or more utilitarianists is to create a scenario. And so philosophers and psychologists and researchers create these scenarios that they call moral dilemmas. You present a situation that forces a person to really think about the morality of the situation and have to come to terms with why they think it's right or wrong. And so one of the best people that I know that makes these moral dilemmas is Jonathan Haidt. And I've been reading a book by him just recently called The Righteous Mind. It looks like this, The Righteous Mind. And in the very beginning of this book, he puts out a few moral dilemmas that really made me think about where I fall on this. And I learned where I fall before this, but this helped reaffirm that for me. So let me just read one of the moral dilemmas from Jonathan Haidt and see how you feel about it. So you can even pause the video after I read this and just sort of take a moment to go, do I feel like this is right or wrong? Right? And this just comes from just right off the bat in the first chapter here. A family's dog was killed by a car in front of their house. They had heard that dog meat was delicious. So they cut up the dog's body and cooked it and ate it for dinner. Nobody saw them do this. Okay. So I want you to think. Where do you think? Is that right or is that wrong? So thinking about that particular example, a lot of us, including myself, have an initial disgust reaction. Like, whoa, wait a minute. This family's eating their own pet, eating their dog? To me, having owned dogs in the past and knowing people that own dogs and loving dogs, and also just the fact of eating dog meat is not something I've ever done. I'm sort of initially disgusted by it, right? So there's an initial emotional gut ugh. But then I go, okay, well, why? Why? Then I question that reaction. You question that gut feeling, right? Okay, well, why is that bad? And then you think, well, no one saw them. The dog was already dead, so no one really got hurt. I don't know. So it's a moral dilemma. Do you see? Because it's your gut reaction is not good, but your logic kicks in. And you go, well, what really happened there that was so terrible, right? And so you get these conflicting feelings. Your emotional response is one way, but your logic sort of conflicts with that, and so we call it a moral dilemma. To connect that back to the deontology versus utilitarianists, a deontologist who has a moral code that says you do not eat dogs would find that to be a wrong thing to do, would condemn that act in a moral sense by saying that is wrong because my moral code says you do not eat dogs, regardless of the outcome. Now, a utilitarian or a consequentialist would look at that same thing and they might have an emotional sort of disgust reaction. They might. But then they might say, well, what are the consequences of that? The dog was already dead. No one got hurt. In fact, they got nutrition from it. Right? The dog didn't go to waste, weirdly enough, in a way. Nobody saw them do it, so they're not going to suffer any repercussions in the society, right? It's sort of a secret. So, your rational brain then kicks in and says, nah, actually the consequences aren't bad, so we can't say that's a morally wrong thing to do. So that's a good example. Let me give you one more. Let me give you another one, if that one didn't do it for you. So here's one more moral dilemma for you that Jonathan Haidt writes in his book here. He says this is a more challenging one, and it is more challenging. Brace yourselves for this moral dilemma. A man goes to the supermarket once a week and buys a chicken. But before cooking the chicken, he has sexual intercourse with it. Then he cooks it and eats it. This is in the privacy of his own home, and no one sees this. Again, what do you think? I think it's probably a similar thought process maybe to what you had in the first dilemma. It's your emotional gut reaction is, oh God, what is that? Right? Your initial reaction is just like a disgust, like what kind of person does this? And then you start thinking about it like, okay, well, what are the consequences of it? Well, the chicken's already dead. No one's getting hurt. In fact, it seems like he's getting pleasure from it, even though it's like a way that I wouldn't imagine I would want. And you kind of get dumbfounded because you're like, well, my intuition is it's not right, but I can't find a good reason to condemn him. And so one of the terms that Jonathan Haidt uses to call this sort of moment is you're morally dumbfounded. You're looking for reasons to condemn this person. You're like scanning your brain. Okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? But you can't find any. So I think I like to just sort of lay out those two examples, those quote unquote moral dilemmas, and I think they're a good way for you to kind of assess where you are. Do you feel like you're a deontologist, or do you feel like you're a consequentialist, and maybe why? So that's that little video. I just wanted to give you something to mull over, kind of basically make you question why you think something's right or wrong, right? Because you can't just go through life just going, well, that's right, that's wrong, that's right, that's wrong, without actually knowing why you think that, right? So whether you're a deontologist or you're a consequentialist, either way, at least know what you are. And hey, if you don't like what you are, you can change. But that's it for me. I just wanted to drop a little video about something that I've been thinking about what I've been reading about. Hope everyone's staying safe out there. Peace be with you. And I'll see you on the next video. All right, everybody. Have a good one. Peace.